A woman screams. The sound tears through the humid July air of Arras, a provincial town in northern France, where ancient cobblestones have witnessed centuries of human suffering. Blood seeps between the stones as 6-year-old Maximilien stands frozen in a doorway. His small face drained of color, watching his mother die in childbirth alongside her stillborn infant. This moment, brutal, inescapable, will haunt him forever, planting the first seed of his lifelong obsession with control, with never again being powerless in the face of death. This child, Maximilien François-Marie Isidore de Robespierre, will become the most paradoxical figure of the modern age. A man who champions human rights while orchestrating mass executions, who defends democracy while strangling it, who pursues virtue with such fanatical devotion that he becomes, to many, the embodiment of evil itself. 2 centuries later, his name alone conjures the guillotine's blade and the spectre of revolutionary terror. Yet here lies the most unsettling truth. He never stopped believing he was saving the world. He died convinced of his righteousness, certain that every drop of blood spilled served the greater good. This is not merely the story of a tyrant's rise, it is the chilling anatomy of how noble intentions, twisted by trauma and absolute power, can birth unimaginable horror. The answers to his transformation lie buried in a childhood so scarred it fractured his perception of reality, in the pages of philosophers who offered him both solace and a terrifying new creed, and in the crucible of a revolution that demanded impossible choices. You're about to witness how idealism can curdle into poison, how liberty can be sacrificed on its own altar, and how the pursuit of perfection can unleash hell itself. May 6th, 1758. The tradition-bound city of Arras, Maximilien enters the world already marked by shame. His mother, Jacqueline Carreau, daughter of a brewer, was 5 months pregnant when she hastily married François de Robespierre, a young lawyer from a respectable but modest family. In rigidly Catholic pre-revolutionary France, this transgression clings to the family name like a stain, though it proves merely a pale shadow of the tragedies to come. The infant Maximilien is frail, almost ethereal, fighting for every breath, as if already engaged in a desperate battle with life itself. Death hovers over his cradle for months, yet something within him, a tenacious spark, an iron will, keeps him tethered to existence. This same unyielding determination will later define his political career, for better and for catastrophic worse. His father, François, fills their modest home with dangerous books, Voltaire's biting satire, Diderot's encyclopedic challenges to the old order, and most fatefully, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's revolutionary theories on natural rights and popular sovereignty. Little Maximilien, precocious and intense, devours these radical texts, absorbing theories of social contracts, and the general will like a sponge soaking up gasoline. A philosophical bomb is being assembled in his young mind, one that will detonate across Europe with earth-shattering consequences. July 16th, 1764. Arras swelters under suffocating summer heat. 6-year-old Maximilien witnesses his world disintegrate in real time. His mother, Jacqueline, endures hours of agonizing labor, her screams echoing through their small house. The midwife and doctor work with frantic desperation, but blood, a horrifying amount, stains everything. As grey dawn breaks over Arras, both mother and newborn lie dead. His sister Charlotte later wrote that Maximilien stood utterly still in the doorway, face ashen, trapped in silent horror. From that moment, she recalled, he could never speak of their mother without tears, but the universe was far from finished with its systematic destruction of his childhood. His father, François, consumed by grief, drowns his sorrow in alcohol, becoming a spectral presence haunting rooms where his wife once lived. Days bleed into weeks as he ignores his 4 young children, Maximilien, Augustin, Charlotte, and infant Henriette. The man who should have been their protector abandons his role, leaving them to fend for themselves in a house that feels more tomb than home. Then comes the ultimate betrayal. November 3rd, 1766. 8-year-old Maximilien, already shouldering responsibilities far beyond his years, returns from school to find his father's room empty, clothes strewn about, a hastily scribbled letter on the desk. François de Robespierre has fled, disappeared, vanished from their lives like unwanted refuse. He will die in Munich 11 years later, without ever seeing again the son whose name will become synonymous with both revolutionary glory and unimaginable terror. The transformation. Watch the metamorphosis happen almost instantaneously. The relatively carefree boy dies that November day. Charlotte documents the chilling change. Her brother becomes like a little old man overnight. He takes charge of his younger siblings with cold, mathematical precision. Playfulness evaporates, replaced by relentless duty. Laughter becomes a forgotten luxury. Trust in others? Impossible. If your own parents can abandon you, one to death, the other to cowardice, who can ever be relied upon? This double abandonment ignites an obsession with virtue, with unwavering reliability that will have monumental consequences. If parents are fallible, if love betrays, if adults are fundamentally untrustworthy, then only perfect, immutable moral principles can offer safety and order. He seeks refuge in books, finding surrogate fathers in the heroes of ancient Rome, Cato the Younger, Brutus, whose stoic virtues become his guiding stars. Classical republicanism, with its emphasis on civic duty and moral rectitude, becomes his new religion. The boy who will one day judge a king is learning to judge everyone by impossibly high standards, standards that will eventually render mercy weakness, compromise betrayal, and dissent a capital crime. October 1769. 11-year-old Maximilien leaves Arras forever, carrying his few possessions in a single trunk. Thanks to the Bishop of Arras's patronage, he has secured a scholarship to the prestigious Collège Louis le Grand in Paris, the intellectual furnace that forged minds like Voltaire and Diderot. Louis le Grand proves a paradoxical blend of intellectual heaven and social hell. 3,000 of Europe's brightest young minds crammed together in ancient stone buildings, thick with ambition, rivalry, and cruelty. Academic demands are relentless. Latin, Greek, rhetoric, philosophy, mathematics, science. The Jansenist-influenced priests accept nothing less than total intellectual mastery. Maximilien excels academically, consistently earning top grades, but suffers socially. His provincial clothes, somber demeanor, and lack of noble pedigree mark him as an outsider. While wealthier Parisian students indulge in the city's pleasures, Maximilien finds solace in the college library. There, amidst towering shelves, he encounters the complete works of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This moment arguably seals his fate. Rousseau's ideas resonate profoundly with the abandoned boy's soul. The concept of man's natural goodness, society's corrupting influence, the sacredness of the general will. These are not abstract theories to Maximilien, but explanations for the injustices he has endured. Rousseau becomes the intellectual father François failed to be. The social contract becomes his personal Bible, its tenets, the bedrock of his political philosophy. His closest friend during these years is Camille Desmoulins, a brilliant but stuttering youth from Guise. Together they walk the Luxembourg Gardens, young minds ablaze with Rousseau's theories, dreaming of a regenerated France founded on virtue and equality rather than privilege and corruption. Neither boy can imagine that their profound friendship, forged in youthful idealism, will one day shatter on the anvil of political expediency, with one sending the other to the guillotine. May 1775. A moment arrives that plants the seeds of regicide in a teenage mind. 16-year-old Maximilien, recognized for academic brilliance, is chosen to deliver a Latin oration welcoming King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette to Paris after their coronation. He practices for weeks, memorizing every classical phrase, perhaps dreaming of royal approval. 300 students gather in the college courtyard. Maximilien stands alone on a platform, dressed in his finest borrowed clothes, heart pounding with nervous excitement. But the royal carriage is 3 hours late. Cold rain begins falling, drenching the waiting students, turning the courtyard into a muddy quagmire. When the opulent coach finally arrives, Louis and Marie Antoinette remain inside, windows fogged, seemingly indifferent to the elaborate welcome. Maximilien delivers his meticulously crafted speech to a closed carriage door, rain dripping from his hair, mud splattering his shoes. The royal couple departs without acknowledgement, not a glance, not a nod. For most students, this is merely frustrating disappointment. For Maximilien, it is profound revelation. Here is the monarchy's contempt for intellect, for diligence, for the very people it rules, made starkly visible. A brilliant student's achievement dismissed with casual indifference. The boy who stands shivering before an uncaring king will one day cast a decisive vote for that same king's death. 1781. At 23, Maximilien returns to Arras armed with a law degree, academic prizes, and a burning mission: to defend the downtrodden and forgotten. His practice becomes less profession than crusade. While other ambitious lawyers chase lucrative cases, Maximilien actively seeks out the marginalized servants cheated by masters, farmers tricked by merchants, and women betrayed by husbands. Where others see hopeless causes, he sees battlegrounds for moral warfare. His first significant case sets the pattern. Dominique Souet, a humble servant girl, is accused of theft by her noble employer. Evidence is flimsy, likely fabricated. Witnesses coached, testimony bought. In hierarchical pre-revolutionary Arras, the outcome seems predetermined. A noble's word invariably outweighs a peasant's truth. But Maximilien refuses to accept how the world works. His defense is a masterclass in legal precision fused with righteous fury. He dissects the prosecution's case, exposing inconsistencies and lies, then elevates the proceedings beyond simple theft, transforming the courtroom into a forum on justice and equality. When Souhet is declared innocent, a rare victory for common folk against privilege. Crowds cheer outside the courthouse. Maximilien has found his calling, making the impossible possible through moral conviction and eloquent reason. 1783 brings another defining moment. Pierre-Louis de Vicery de Boisvalet installs one of Benjamin Franklin's revolutionary lightning rods on his house in Saint-Omer. Fearful neighbors, convinced this contraption will attract divine wrath, sue to have it removed. Local authorities side with superstition over science. Maximilien takes the case, transforming it into symbolic battle between future and past, reason and fear. The courtroom becomes his laboratory. He explains electricity's principles with crystalline clarity, quotes Franklin's experiments as proof, frames the dispute as civilization's critical choice: embrace progress or cower in ignorance's darkness. When judges rule for science, spectators erupt in applause. His victory is celebrated in philosophical societies across France. At 25, the orphaned lawyer from Arras becomes a celebrated champion of Enlightenment values, marked for greater things. Physically, he is far from imposing, barely 5 feet 3 inches, slight build, pale skin, marked by childhood smallpox, piercing blue-green eyes behind distinctive steel-rimmed spectacles. His health is perpetually fragile. Modern analysis suggests he suffered from sarcoidosis, causing debilitating fatigue, nosebleeds, and painful sores. Yet he never allows physical weakness to compromise his iron moral resolve. This dedicated lawyer, this champion of the underdog, this physically frail but morally indomitable man, is slowly becoming a weapon, and France, teetering on the brink of upheaval, is about to provide him with targets. Act 2, the revolutionary ascendant. The kingdom's death throes. Winter 1788 to 1789. France is dying from within. Catastrophic financial crisis, years of mismanagement, and fundamentally unjust taxation have brought the kingdom to its knees. Military humiliations abroad erode national pride, while aristocracy and clergy jealously guard their exemptions, sabotaging reform. King Louis XVI, well-meaning but indecisive, faces a stark choice: radical reform or revolution. He chooses the path that will destroy everything, including himself. He calls for a meeting of the Estates General, an ancient assembly that hasn't convened since 1614. It is a desperate gamble and the decision that will unleash Maximilien Robespierre onto the world stage. Artois province explodes with political electricity. For the first time in nearly 2 centuries, ordinary people can elect representatives to voice grievances at Versailles. The Third Estate, encompassing everyone from wealthy merchants to impoverished peasants, constituting 98% of the population, finally has opportunity to challenge the entrenched power that has crushed them for a millennium. Maximilien throws himself into the electoral campaign with laser-like focus. He authors impassioned pamphlets demanding genuine democratic representation and aristocratic dominance's end. He delivers fiery speeches to packed halls across the province. His message is simple yet revolutionary. The Third Estate is the nation, and its deputies must never compromise with privilege and corruption. April 26, 1789. Election day arrives with biblical intensity. Voters pack Arras Cathedral, each publicly announcing his choice before the assembled crowd. When Maximilien Robespierre's name is called as one of 8 deputies for Artois, supporters' cheers shake the ancient stones. At 30, the orphaned lawyer abandoned by his father is now entrusted to represent his province at the most momentous political gathering in French history. May 5th, 1789. The Estates General's formal opening at Versailles is a spectacle designed to reinforce the old order. But for keen observers like Robespierre, it reveals everything wrong with the world he is determined to shatter. The First Estate parades in rich purple and crimson robes, symbols of wealth extracted from the poorest believers. The Second Estate swaggers in silks and gold, displaying privileges earned by birth's accident. Then come the Third Estate representatives, shuffling in plain black their deliberately inferior attire, advertising their subordinate status. Maximilien walks among these commoners, his provincial origins marking him as a nobody, amidst glittering political names like the Comte de Mirabeau or Abbé Sieyès. Within weeks, this unassuming outsider will carve out a reputation as one of the revolution's most principled and soon most feared voices. The Estates General immediately deadlocks over the fundamental question determining its nature. How will they vote? Tradition dictates voting by order, allowing the First and Second Estates to perpetually outvote the Third, despite representing only 2% of the population. The Third Estate demands voting by head, giving them numerical majority and power to enact genuine reform. Louis XVI, caught between privileged orders' intransigence and commoners' rising demands, fatally hesitates, then sides with tradition. He chooses revolution. June 17th, 1789. Democracy explodes into existence in raw, defiant form. Frustrated by deadlock and royal inaction, Third Estate deputies take a momentous leap. They declare themselves the National Assembly, claiming exclusive right to represent the French nation. It is direct challenge to 1,000 years of monarchy. Robespierre supports this audacious motion with religious passion for him. This is democracy's sacred birth, the moment when people's legitimate representatives supersede a king's arbitrary authority. 3 days later, the assembly arrives at their meeting hall to find it locked and guarded by royal troops. Instead of dispersing, they regroup in a nearby tennis court, the Jeu de Paume. There, amidst a sporting arena's incongruous surroundings, they swear the oath that becomes a foundational legend, never to separate and to meet again wherever circumstances demand, until the constitution of the kingdom is established on solid foundations. 576 deputies sign this revolutionary document, history's most audacious birth certificate for popular sovereignty. Maximilien Robespierre's signature appears clearly among them. "We have broken slavery's chains," he writes exultantly to his friend Antoine Buissard. "The people have reclaimed their rights, and no human power can restore the old tyranny." But breaking chains is not the same as building freedom's stable edifice. The idealistic young lawyer is about to learn that the chasm between democratic theory and political power's brutal realities can often only be bridged with blood. The early months test everything Maximilien believes about himself and the world. He is not initially a dominant figure. Powerful orators like Mirabeau, with aristocratic confidence and booming voice, overshadow him. Robespierre, with his high-pitched voice and lengthy speeches filled with abstract principles, struggles to be heard above more seasoned politicians' din. He remains the provincial outsider, easily dismissed by sophisticated Parisian elite. But what he lacks in immediate charisma, he compensates with unwavering consistency and moral intensity. His first significant speech comes during church reform debates. Rising from his seat in what will become infamous as the Mountain, the radical deputies bloc, he argues passionately that bishops and priests should be elected by the people they serve, not appointed by pope or king. The people have sovereign right to choose their spiritual guides, just as they have chosen their political representatives, he declares, voice gaining strength. No authority, papal or royal, can legitimately override the nation's general will in matters so crucial to their lives. As 1789 and 1790 unfold, his confidence grows with each intervention. He becomes a fixture at the Jacobin Club, a political society that evolved from a Breton deputies' meeting place into a radical network across France. He tirelessly opposes property qualifications for voting or office holding. Can wealth determine virtue? He demands. Is a man's worth measured by his purse's size rather than his principles' quality? Most controversially, far ahead of contemporaries, he passionately demands complete abolition of slavery in France's Caribbean colonies. "Perish the colonies," he famously exclaims in May 1791, "if they are preserved by sacrificing justice and humanity. Perish the colonies if colonists wish to force us, by threats, to sanction a system degrading human nature." This makes him one of the earliest uncompromising advocates for racial equality, a stance alienating wealthy colonial interests, but solidifying his image as a man of unshakable principle. Each speech follows a devastating pattern: meticulous preparation, arguments grounded in universal moral principles derived from Rousseau, and the classics, passionate delivery that increasingly sways audiences. Unlike pragmatic politicians who count votes and build alliances, Maximilien approaches every issue as cosmic battle between absolute virtue and absolute corruption. There is rarely room for nuance in his Manichaean worldview. By 1791, Maximilien has earned a nickname that will define him forever: the Incorruptible. While other deputies accept bribes, seek personal advancement, or moderate positions for political gain, he remains steadfast in his principles. He lives modestly, dresses simply, refuses all offers of personal enrichment. His moral purity becomes both his greatest strength and ultimately his fatal weakness. The nickname originates from a specific incident. When the Assembly debates whether deputies can serve in the new Legislative Assembly, most favor allowing re-election to maintain continuity. Maximilien argues passionately against this, proposing what becomes known as the self-denying ordinance: no current deputy can serve in the next legislature. His colleagues are stunned. He is effectively voting himself out of power at the height of his influence. "We must prove," he declares, "that we seek not personal advancement, but the people's good. We must show that our revolution is not about replacing one set of self-interested rulers with another, but about establishing genuine popular sovereignty." The ordinance passes, and Maximilien returns to Paris as a private citizen, but one whose reputation for incorruptible virtue has spread throughout France. This decision reveals both his greatest strength and most dangerous delusion. His strength, genuine commitment to principle over personal gain. His delusion, the belief that moral purity alone can navigate revolution's treacherous waters. He's about to discover that in politics, as in war, the pure of heart often become the most ruthless killers. 1792. Europe's crowned heads, terrified by revolutionary contagion. Mass armies on France's borders. Inside France, the revolution radicalizes as external threats mount and internal enemies multiply. The king's attempted flight to Varennes in June 1791 has shattered any remaining illusions about royal loyalty. War with Austria and Prussia erupts in April 1792, initially disastrously for French forces. Maximilien, now a private citizen but still influential through the Jacobin Club and his newspaper The Defender of the Constitution, watches with growing alarm as the revolution he helped birth threatens to devour itself. Moderate Girondins control the Legislative Assembly, favoring war as a means to unite the nation and export revolutionary ideals. Maximilien opposes this policy with prophetic insight. No one loves armed missionaries, he warns. The first maxim of your policy should be that people cannot be liberated despite themselves. But his warnings go unheeded. Military defeats mount, economic crisis deepens, and popular anger reaches boiling point. The sans-culottes, the urban poor, who form the revolution's shock troops, demand more radical measures. They want price controls, wealth redistribution, and above all, the traitors' heads who they believe are sabotaging the war effort. August 10th, 1792. The storm breaks. Parisian crowds, led by radical sections and provincial volunteers, storm the Tuileries Palace. The Swiss Guard is massacred, the King and Queen flee to the Legislative Assembly for protection, and the monarchy effectively ends. A new body, the Paris Commune, seizes power in the capital, demanding the king's trial and the revolution's radicalization. Maximilien watches these events with mixed emotions. The violence appalls him. He has always opposed bloodshed in principle. But the popular uprising's democratic energy exhilarates him. Here is Rousseau's general will made manifest, the people rising to defend their revolution against its enemies. He begins to see violence not as evil in itself, but as potentially necessary for virtue's defense. This is the crucial psychological turning point. The man who once opposed the death penalty is beginning to rationalize its use against the revolution's enemies. The lawyer who defended individual rights is starting to subordinate them to collective will. The idealist who dreamed of peaceful reform is accepting that paradise might require purgatory's fires. Eni, September 2nd to 7th, 1792. Paris explodes in an orgy of violence that will haunt the revolution forever. Rumors spread that imprisoned priests, nobles, and common criminals are plotting to break out and massacre patriotic families while their men fight at the front. Mobs storm the prisons, conducting impromptu trials that invariably end in death. Over 5 days, approximately 1,400 prisoners are butchered, half of Paris's prison population. The massacres present Maximilien with his first great moral test. Does he condemn this popular violence, risking his influence with the radical sections? Or does he rationalize it as regrettable but necessary for the revolution's defense? He chooses a middle path that reveals his evolving psychology. He neither condemns nor endorses the massacres, but explains them as the people's understandable response to treason and betrayal. When the people are oppressed, he writes, when they have only themselves to rely on, would it be surprising if they judge their enemies by different standards than those used by courts corrupted by intrigue? This is not yet full endorsement of terror, but it is the first step down a path that will lead to the guillotine's systematic use. The massacres also reveal the revolution's fundamental dilemma: how to maintain democratic legitimacy while using undemocratic means to defend democracy itself. Maximilien is beginning to formulate an answer that will define the terror. The people's will, expressed through their representatives, justifies any means necessary to preserve the revolution. Individual rights must yield to collective survival. In September 21st, 1792. The newly elected National Convention meets for the first time. Its first act is to abolish the monarchy and proclaim the French Republic. Maximilien, elected as a Paris deputy with the highest vote total, takes his seat among the Mountain's radical deputies. At 34, he is no longer the provincial outsider, but one of the revolution's most respected voices. The convention immediately faces the question that will define its existence: what to do with Louis XVI? The Girondins, led by Jacques-Pierre Brissot, favor exile or imprisonment. They fear that executing a king will unite all of Europe against France and radicalize the revolution beyond control. The Mountain, increasingly led by Maximilien, demands the ultimate penalty. For them, the king's continued existence threatens the Republic's very legitimacy. Maximilien's speech on the king's trial, delivered December 3rd, 1792, marks his complete transformation from idealistic lawyer to revolutionary prosecutor. Louis was king, and the Republic is established, he declares. The famous question you are examining is settled by these words alone. Louis was dethroned by his crimes. Louis denounced the French people as rebels. He appealed to chains and executioners to punish them. Victory and the people have decided that he alone was a rebel. The logic is chilling in its simplicity. The king, by opposing the people's will, has placed himself outside the social contract. He is not a citizen to be tried, but an enemy to be eliminated. We have no sentence to pronounce for or against a man, Maximilien continues, but a measure of public safety to implement, an act of national providence to perform. This speech reveals the complete intellectual framework that will justify the terror. Individual guilt or innocence becomes irrelevant. Only the revolution's needs matter. The general will, as interpreted by its representatives, becomes the supreme law, overriding all other considerations. Maximilien has found the philosophical justification for mass murder. January 21st, 1793. Louis XVI mounts the scaffold in the Place de la Révolution. The crowd falls silent as the former King of France addresses his people one last time. I die free from hatred of those who have condemned me. I pray that my blood may be useful in restoring happiness to France and you, unhappy people. The drums roll, drowning out his words. The blade falls. Maximilien watches from the convention, his face impassive. He has voted for death without appeal or delay, helping secure the narrow majority that sealed the king's fate. For him, this is not regicide, but justice, the people's sovereign will made manifest. The death of the tyrant, he will later write, is the birth of the Republic. But the king's execution unleashes forces that will ultimately consume Maximilien himself. Europe's monarchies, horrified by regicide, form the first coalition against France. Internal rebellion erupts in the Vendée and other regions. Economic crisis deepens as war drains the treasury and disrupts trade. The revolution, having crossed the Rubicon of royal blood, must now fight for its very survival. Maximilien understands the stakes with crystalline clarity. We must either triumph completely or perish, he tells the convention. There is no middle ground between liberty and death. He is preparing to implement the logic of his own philosophy. If the revolution's survival requires terror, then terror becomes virtue. If the people's enemies must die for the people to live, then death becomes justice. The Incorruptible is about to become the architect of terror. The man who once defended individual rights is preparing to sacrifice them on the altar of collective will. The idealist who dreamed of peaceful reform is about to unleash systematic violence on an unprecedented scale. The boy who witnessed his mother's death is about to become death's most efficient servant. Spring 1793. The French Republic faces annihilation from all sides. The first coalition, Austria, Prussia, Britain, Spain, and smaller powers masses nearly 500,000 troops on France's borders. Internal rebellion spreads like wildfire. The Catholic and Royalist Vendée rises in bloody revolt. Lyon defies the Convention's authority. Toulon surrenders to the British fleet. Economic collapse threatens as a signet currency becomes worthless, and food shortages spark riots. In this crucible of crisis, Maximilien Robespierre emerges as the revolution's most uncompromising defender. No longer the provincial lawyer seeking justice for individual clients, he has become something far more dangerous. A true believer, convinced that only absolute measures can save the Republic. The man who once opposed the death penalty now sees it as virtue's necessary weapon. The transformation is complete, yet he remains blind to it. In his mind, he has not changed circumstances, have simply revealed the full implications of his principles. If the people are sovereign, then their enemies are traitors. If the revolution embodies virtue, then its opponents represent vice. If the Republic must survive, then its survival justifies any means. The logic is impeccable, the conclusion horrifying. April 6th, 1793. The convention, desperate for effective leadership, creates the Committee of Public Safety, 12 men granted virtually unlimited power to defend the Republic. Initially dominated by Georges Danton, the committee represents pragmatic response to crisis. But pragmatism, Maximilien believes, is precisely what the revolution cannot afford. Compromise with enemies means betrayal of principles. Half measures ensure complete defeat. July 27th, 1793. Maximilien joins the committee, bringing with him an uncompromising vision of revolutionary virtue. Unlike Danton, who sees politics as the art of the possible, Maximilien views it as the science of the absolute. There can be no negotiation with vice, no accommodation with corruption, no mercy for traitors. The Republic must be purified, whatever the cost. His first target is the Girondins, the moderate faction that has dominated the convention since 1792. Led by men like Brissot and Roland, the Girondins favor federalism over centralization, gradual reform over radical transformation, negotiated peace over total war. To Maximilien, they represent everything wrong with bourgeois politics: compromise, self-interest, and fatal weakness in the face of enemies. The purge begins with Charlotte Corday's assassination of Jean-Paul Marat on July 13th, 1793. Marat, the radical journalist known as the Friend of the People, has been Maximilien's ally in demanding extreme measures. His murder by a Girondin sympathizer provides the perfect pretext for eliminating the entire moderate faction. October 31st, 1793. 21. Girondin leaders mount the scaffold, their execution marking the revolution's decisive turn toward terror. Maximilien watches with satisfaction as his former colleagues die. "The tree of liberty," he quotes, "must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." The Girondins, in his mind, were tyrants disguised as patriots. Their deaths are not murders, but necessary surgery on the body politic. The terror is not chaos, but system, a carefully constructed machine for identifying, trying, and eliminating the Republic's enemies. At its heart stands the Revolutionary Tribunal, established March 10th, 1793, to provide legal veneer for political executions. The tribunal's procedures are streamlined for efficiency. Minimal evidence required, no appeals permitted, only two verdicts possible: acquittal or death. Maximilien does not personally send victims to the guillotine, but his speeches provide the intellectual framework that makes mass execution seem not only justified, but virtuous. "Terror," he declares in a famous speech, "is nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, and inflexible. It is therefore an emanation of virtue. This is not the language of a bloodthirsty tyrant, but of a moral philosopher, convinced that killing serves the greater good." The categories of enemies expand with terrifying logic. First, obvious traitors, nobles plotting counter-revolution, priests refusing constitutional oaths, and generals suspected of treachery. Then, less obvious threats: merchants accused of hoarding, farmers charged with speculation, and workers denounced for insufficient revolutionary enthusiasm. Finally, anyone whose loyalty seems questionable, whose past seems suspicious, and whose present behavior appears insufficiently virtuous. The law of suspects, passed September 17th, 1793, makes virtually any French citizen vulnerable to arrest. Suspects include those who, by their conduct, their connections, their words or their writings, showed themselves partisans of tyranny or federalism and enemies of liberty. The definition is so broad it could encompass almost anyone. Maximilien approves this expansion of state power with philosophical satisfaction. The Republic, he argues, must defend itself against all enemies, obvious and hidden. In revolutionary times, neutrality becomes complicity, silence becomes guilt, and insufficient enthusiasm becomes treason. The logic is inexorable. If you are not actively supporting the revolution, you are passively betraying it. June 8th, 1794. Maximilien orchestrates his masterpiece, the Festival of the Supreme Being, a massive public ceremony designed to replace Christianity with a new civic religion. 500,000 Parisians gather on the Champ de Mars to witness Maximilien, dressed in a sky blue coat and carrying a bouquet of flowers, led the nation in worship of virtue, reason, and the Supreme Being. The festival represents the culmination of his philosophical journey. Having rejected traditional religion as superstition and atheism as immoral, he has created a new faith with himself as its high priest. The Supreme Being, in Maximilien's theology, is the divine force that guarantees natural rights and moral law. The revolution becomes a sacred mission to align human society with divine will. Terror becomes not just politically necessary, but religiously mandated. Standing atop an artificial mountain, addressing the vast crowd, Maximilien experiences his moment of supreme triumph. He is no longer merely a politician, but a prophet. No longer just a revolutionary, but a redeemer. The abandoned child has become the nation's father. The powerless boy has become the republic's savior. Yet even in this moment of apparent victory, the seeds of his destruction are already sprouting. Many deputies watch the ceremony with growing unease. Maximilien's assumption of quasi-religious authority alarms even his allies. The man who once criticized kings for claiming divine sanction now seems to be making similar claims for himself. By summer 1794, the terror has acquired its own momentum, consuming not just the revolution's enemies, but its own children. Danton, Maximilien's former ally, has been executed for moderation. Camille Desmoulins, his childhood friend, has been guillotined for criticizing the terror's excesses. Hébert and his ultra-radical followers have been eliminated for pushing too far left. Each purge strengthens Maximilien's position, while simultaneously narrowing his base of support. The revolution, like Saturn, devours its own children, and Maximilien is both its chief executioner and its next victim. The statistics are staggering. Between September 1793 and July 1794, the Revolutionary Tribunal condemns 2,639 people to death in Paris alone. Across France, estimates suggest 16,000 to 17,000 executions during the terror's peak. Maximilien does not personally kill these people, but his speeches and policies create the atmosphere that makes mass killing seem not only acceptable, but virtuous. He has become what he once opposed, an absolute ruler whose word is law, whose enemies die, whose power seems unlimited. Yet he remains convinced of his righteousness. In his mind, he is not a tyrant, but virtue's servant, not a killer, but justice's instrument. The boy who witnessed his mother's death has become death's most efficient administrator, yet he still sees himself as life's defender. This is the final, most chilling aspect of his transformation. He never stops believing he is saving the world. July 27th, 1794, 9 Thermidor, Year 2, in the revolutionary calendar. The day that will end both the terror and Maximilien's life. The convention, finally finding courage born of desperation, turns against its master. Deputy after deputy rises to denounce the man they once feared to criticize. Maximilien, caught off guard by the sudden rebellion, struggles to respond. His voice, always his greatest weapon, fails him at the crucial moment. When he tries to speak, shouts of "down with the tyrant" drown out his words. The man who sent thousands to their deaths is declared an outlaw by the very assembly he once dominated. That night, as loyal forces storm the Hôtel de Ville where Maximilien has taken refuge, he attempts suicide with a pistol. The bullet shatters his jaw but fails to kill him. He lies bleeding on a table, his face destroyed, his power broken, waiting for the dawn that will bring his own appointment with the guillotine. July 28, 1794. At 6 in the evening, Maximilien Robespierre mounts the scaffold he has sent so many others to climb. The crowd that once cheered his speeches now jeers his final moments. The executioner tears away the bandage covering his shattered jaw, causing him to scream in agony. Then the blade falls, and the Incorruptible is no more. With his death, the terror ends. The revolution, exhausted by its own violence, turns toward moderation and eventually toward Napoleon's dictatorship. The republic that Maximilien died trying to save will not survive him by a decade. Maximilien Robespierre died as he lived, convinced of his own righteousness, certain that his actions served the greater good, unable to see the monster he had become. He was not evil in any conventional sense. He was something far more dangerous, a good man corrupted by absolute power and unwavering certainty. His tragedy is not that he abandoned his principles, but that he followed them to their logical, horrifying conclusion. The boy who lost his parents became a man who could not bear to lose control. The lawyer who defended the innocent became the architect of mass murder. The idealist who dreamed of perfect virtue became the embodiment of virtuous terror. His legacy haunts us still. Every revolution that promises paradise and delivers hell, every leader who claims to speak for the people while silencing them, every ideology that justifies present suffering for future perfection bears his mark. Maximilien Robespierre was not a monster. He was something far more terrifying. He was us, carried to our logical extreme. He was what we might become if we ever become absolutely certain that we are absolutely right. In the end, the most chilling lesson of his life is not that power corrupts, but that virtue, unchecked by doubt or mercy, can become the most dangerous force on earth. The incorruptible died incorruptible. That is both his vindication and his damnation. That is why, 2 centuries later, we still cannot decide whether Maximilien Robespierre was a hero or a villain. Perhaps he was both. Perhaps that is the most terrifying truth of all.